I am from beyond. Slay your enemies, and all you desire shall be yours. Nothing you dream of is impossible for me to accomplish. Today on the Comic Book Report, Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. Stick around and check it out. How's it going, everyone? This is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, I'm really excited to be diving into the world of Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. Yes, this is the first Secret Wars event from Jim Shooter back in the day, and this was my first opportunity to actually make my way through these issues. Before we dive in though, I want to go ahead and shout out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up comic book collected editions, check out their website. You can even use my code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note, if you use my affiliate code or link to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, and it's a great way to support our channel. Thank you for considering. Now let's get started with today's review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Jim Shooter and illustrated primarily by Mike Zeck. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 1984. The volume itself collects Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars issues 1 through 12, Thor issue 383, She-Hulk issue 10, and What If issue 4 and 114. And finally, this oversized hardcover comes in at 496 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Marvel Superheroes Secret War Omnibus from Marvel Comics. I should note I did get the standard edition cover. I believe there was a direct market variant cover from Alex Ross that is quite beautiful as well, but I really like this standard cover that just has the straight up cover art. Love seeing that 80s art style from Mike Zeck. Really, really beautiful stuff, and absolutely indicative of the kind of artwork we'll see within the pages of Secret Wars. On the back cover, you can see the thumbnails of all the different issues covers. We have the 12 issues of the event, along with 4 issues that in some ways loosely tie into Secret Wars from the pages of Thor, She-Hulk, and What If. Some of these were published much later, so the art style differences at the back of this omnibus can be a bit jarring, but to me it just feels like added bonus features, extra issues at the back. I thought they were a ton of fun to visit, but more on that in a little bit. Right now I want to give you a better look at that dust jacket along with the under the dust jacket artwork we have for this collection. This is a really interesting one. Like I said, most of the issues inside come from the mid-80s, and I think that the dust jacket style feels a bit classic, but I like to see it. I really enjoy this book. It is a under 500 page omnibus, so it's on the smaller size, but we still get a lot of great reading material here. I would have loved to personally see them include Secret Wars 2 and one gigantic Secret Wars omnibus, but you know what? This is still a really fun read. It's a little bit zippier. Love the cover art design, and this under the dust jacket artwork. They basically stamped a bunch of the covers from the issues in kind of a collage, and it looks like it almost has an interesting color saturation filter look on it, but overall I like the design. They could have gone so many different ways with the under the dust jacket artwork, but I think what they chose is a lot of fun. It's like a blast of nostalgia. Gives you a little taste for the issues. Very, very cool. And now I want to go ahead and make my way to the sewn binding, just to give you a quick look at what you can expect. It is glossy print paper stock, like I said, sewn binding here, oversized format. I love that this is still an era where we have a lot of the borders with the panel layout, so there's very little gutter loss, at least from my reading. Overall, a fantastic experience, great binding. Okay, and now that we've taken a look at that, we can dive into the collection proper. I am happy to say we have a proper table of contents with all of the different issues indexed with a page number. Really great way to revisit your favorite moments or issues right from the start. Great mapping on this guy. Like I said, it's the 12 issues of the event itself, along with 4 bonus issues that are all kind of loosely tied into the events of Secret Wars. We have that She-Hulk issue, a Thor issue, and 2 What Ifs. I'll get to that in in a little bit, but overall, this is a really fun book, and there's also a ton of extras, and again, more on that in a little bit. As far as what this series is really about, before I get into that, I want to talk about how it came to be. You'll get this from the extras we have in this book. Some of the written works and the extras at the back go into it in greater detail, but essentially it was a toy merchandising opportunity that the comics basically tied into in some kind of gigantic brand deal. Basically, we knew they had to have a huge roster of characters, both heroes and villains, and had to use the title Secret Wars as it was kind of tested on the demographic they were hoping to hit. And basically from that, we get this whole mini-series. And effectively what it's about is that the heroes and some of the villains, there's about a dozen or so on each side, they get kind of transported to this sort of spaceship kind of thing, and they notice that there's a bunch of weird different patchwork portions of worlds that fuse together before their eyes that make this place called Battle World. The heroes and the villains are both kind of set on different parts of this world, and they hear sort of this disembodied voice during this process saying what I quoted at the start of this video, sort of, I am from beyond. If you slay your enemies, basically I'll give you whatever you desire. This is spoken from someone we know as throughout this book as the Beyonder. Interestingly enough, he's actually never depicted physically in this book. I think that happens in Secret Wars 2 and from there. So the Beyonder is just kind of this disembodied, powerful entity that's sort of constructing everything, has made Battle World and pitted these forces against each other. And the heroes and the villains are kind of scrambling to figure out what to do. On the heroes' side, we have a handful of Avengers, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and other miscellaneous heroes all together. Characters like Captain America, Cyclops, Professor X, She-Hulk, The Thing, Mr. Fantastic, the Hulk, James Rhodes, Iron Man, Nightcrawler, Spider-Man, so many more characters in this roster. On the villains, we have characters like Doctor Doom, Galactus, Doc Ock, the Lizard, and the list just goes on and on from there. You'll see a handful of them in the pages as I flip through. Suffice it to say, it's an impressive kind of best of Marvel Comics at the time. There are a couple interesting, notable omissions in my mind, but this is still a very fun, eclectic assortment of some of Marvel's greats. I think for something that was largely a marketing and merchandising opportunity, this book actually reads really well. I think that if I didn't know historically that that's how this got its start, and if they didn't include it in the written works and the blurbs and extras at the back of the book, I would have no idea that that is what happened to create this storyline. I think it really holds up in and of itself as its own work. I know some people gave it kind of mixed reviews saying, oh, it's not the strongest or what have you, but I think for a series that came out in the 80s, I had so much fun with this crossover event. It was such a blast to read. It doesn't have the stunning dramatic scope as some of its contemporaries over at DC with something like Crisis on Infinite Earths, but I think it's still a ton of fun to read, a great miniseries, and a foundational story point for future works, like all the way up to Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, which I reviewed on the channel a couple months back now. There's so many kind of foundational moments in this book that make me want to revisit Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars, because there's clearly a lot they drew from this when they created that. And anyway, it's just really fascinating to read, especially through a modern lens. I think that these comics do feel a bit dated, but as a fan of a lot of 80s comic runs, I just had a ton of fun. I thought it was terrific. I think that something interesting that I noticed toward the beginning of this storyline is kind of I'll call it tribalism. We have the villains and heroes and all of their different factions trying to come together, and it's not always super neat. In fact, it's often very messy. They kind of appoint leaders, vie for control, things like that. I think to reduce it to its simplest point, the heroes are sort of led by Captain America, Steve Rogers, who kind of takes order. On the villain side, it really is Doctor Doom, just trying to wrestle control from Galactus first, and then ultimately the Beyonder as we progress more through the storyline. We have some sub-factions that start to do their own thing or try to break away. Like we have Magneto and Professor X and all the X-Men kind of having their own third party at one point. A large portion of this book has Galactus kind of staring and doing his own thing. I think because of all these subdivisions, there were a lot of great subplots running through Secret Wars that I didn't really anticipate, but I had a ton of fun with. I think if these groups stayed together a bit more and we didn't get some of those external scenes, this could have been a tight 5 or 6 issue story, but I actually like that we have so many different subplots and groups that we follow narratively. We jump around a lot. There's a lot of great set pieces in the battle world, and they just introduce a lot of great characters that are first appear on Battle World even, and I just really liked it. It was a great 12-issue run. I don't think it overstayed its welcome. I felt it was very well paced, and I felt like there were a lot of great twists and turns. Almost every issue ended on kind of a cliffhanger, and it really made me eager to dive into the next subsequent issue. Another fun wrinkle for me is that Magneto is actually placed on the side of the heroes. We find out toward the end of the book that that is because his motivations, which is really where some of the distinctions came for the factions, came from a more, in his mind, sort of altruistic, virtuous place. He fought for ideals more than his own selfish motivations, like a lot of the heroes. So that's how he was sorted that way. I think that that added a lot of the fuel to the fire in the beginning as these groups started to form, and I wasn't really surprised when the X-Men broke away. I mean, I was, I guess, on the surface a bit surprised, but the more I read, the more it made a lot of sense. They were kind of doing their own thing from the beginning. A couple notable pieces of impact this storyline made to the Marvel Universe that I really enjoyed. I think most well known, at least to me, was that this is where Spider-Man's symbiote costume first premiered. I believe it was Secret Wars issue 8. Spider-Man goes after he sees some of his colleagues get a new costume from some kind of machine in one of the bases. He goes to repair his Spider-Man costume and finds this black material that forms itself over his costume, and it becomes the black symbiote suit. At this point, of course, he has no idea it's alive. We have no idea that this is eventually going to be part of what becomes Venom. But at this point, there is still a lot of insidiousness to that costume. We have him asking a lot of questions. Later on, he even notices, like, hey, this isn't where I got my costume. And hey, is your costume doing this? But at any rate, we have all of the like little kind of foundational moments with the symbiote suit in this book. Thought that was a ton of fun. We also have the intelligent Bruce Banner brained Hulk starting to revert to the more savage, brutal nature of the Hulk throughout this book. Thought that was really interesting as well. And at the end, we actually have the Thing staying on Battleworld. In this story, we actually have the Thing reverting to his human form in Ben Grimm and back to the Thing at seemingly random intervals. By the end of the storyline, however, he has mastered the ability to return to Ben Grimm and then back to the Thing whenever he wants. So that when everyone begins to go home, the Thing tells Mr. Fantastic and the Human Torch, his Fantastic Four colleagues that came along this journey with them. Sue Storm was still back at home. At any rate, he tells them that She-Hulk will take his place as the muscle on the Fantastic Four while he stays and tries to learn the secret as to why he can transform like this, find his role back, his humanity back as Ben Grimm on Battleworld. This is really interesting. I know this ties into the Thing solo series with John Byrne's era. I just got that omnibus. I can't wait to see what we have here with the Thing doing on Battleworld after the events of Secret Wars here. But that's ultimately kind of how this book culminates, and those are some of the big impacts this storyline had on some major characters. We also have the appearance of a new Spider-Woman in the pages of this book. Interestingly enough, her costume is really similar to the black symbiote Spider-Man, and we actually are introduced to her before Peter Parker gets that symbiote costume. And there's even a line that says, oh, I don't know if I was influenced by that woman's costume. I thought that was really interesting, and it kind of undercut the Spider-Man symbiote introduction in my mind. I had no idea they would introduce this character. But she was a fun, notable addition to this work. We also have the first appearance of Titania? I don't really know how to say her name, but a really notable She-Hulk villain gets her start and origin within Secret Wars. This was kind of a fun little wrinkle. Again, I know this is a longer running character now that's been around clearly since 1984, but at any rate, a lot of great moments in this book. There were a lot of fantastic battle sequences. We had some agency for characters I had not seen as much from in a while. Characters like the Lizard got a lot of fun play. The Molecule Man was heavily used in this, along with the character of Claw. So a couple of villains that I generally feel are underutilized got more play. I did like seeing that. They did some fun stuff with the Wasp in this. We have Professor X, who has the use of his legs again, and he kind of becomes the field leader of the X-Men, much to the chagrin and frustration of Storm, who is the leader of the X-Men prior to Secret Wars. This kind of leads to a lot of conflict throughout the book, but overall, like I said, it's a ton of fun. I think that Jim Shooter does an excellent job of balancing all the characters, that by the end of Secret Wars, I feel like almost all the characters here had a great moment, got some play, had a ton of fun with it. Another really notable plot point is, of course, for Colossus, Peter Rasputin. For those that don't know, he was really in love with Kitty Pryde, Shadowcat. He goes to Secret Wars and finds himself under the thrall of this kind of healer native to Battleworld from some different region to create the planet. At any rate, he sort of falls in love with her and completely forgets Kitty Pryde. Ultimately, he ends up losing her. She dies at the end of this, and he is heartbroken. I have read the Uncanny X-Men, Chris Claremont era, some of the earlier parts of his run where these events transpire both before and after Secret Wars, and I remember being so thrown off that all of a sudden Colossus, who was in love with Kitty Pryde, had this other love, doesn't really want to have much to do with Kitty Pryde, breaks up with her, stuff like that. I was always so curious of what this romance looked like, since I never had an opportunity to read Secret Wars prior to reading this book. I think that overall the love story was a little bit weaker than I had hoped, but it was still kind of sweet and overwhelming for Colossus. There was still enough tragedy that I kind of bought it. It sort of worked. That was another really notable wrinkle here that definitely affected relationships after the event was over. I forgot to mention that earlier, but definitely wanted to include that as I think it was a really notable addition for this collection. A couple more plot synopsis beats before I transition over to talking about the art. In this book, after they get on Battleworld, like I said, there's factions that loosely arrange themselves under Captain America and Doctor Doom. We also have the X-Men and a couple other kind of breaking off points, but essentially those are the factions, and we ultimately have Doctor Doom trying to get control of Galactus. He sort of absorbs this power before ultimately trying to absorb the power of the Beyonder, which he seems to have achieved at one point, maybe 3/4 of the way through Secret Wars. He kind of becomes this almost deity level figure as far as his power levels just being absolutely incredible, and we have this kind of faux benevolence. We're not really sure what to do with Doom at this point, but ultimately the Beyonder sort of gets his power back, Doom is kind of defeated, and we have the characters sort of returning home. That's really the ultimate arc of this book. Within that, there's a ton of battles, like I mentioned before. We actually have the war portion of Secret Wars, but I think it's really the interpersonal kind of character relationships and conflict moments that really make this book shine. It was just a ton of fun to watch these characters both come together and join forces or clash with each other in interesting ways. I think it was just, again, it really does feel like playing with all your favorite action figures in a sandbox, making up your own story, which is ultimately what this story sort of came from, an action figure merchandising opportunity. But I've never really seen these characters thrown together like this before, and I cannot believe what Shooter was able to pull off. Frankly, I just think it works, and it works in the most fun way. Going over to the art, like I mentioned earlier, the art from Mike Zeck throughout, to me, this is 80s comics classic artwork. These character models we have for all of our heroes and villains are, in my mind, just kind of iconic or quintessential versions of these characters. I really feel like when you picture a lot of these characters, if you're not exclusively like a modern comic book reader or a fan of the films only, you can really think about these characters, and some of the character models you see, I feel like Zeck perfectly just articulates and executes in how he portrays these characters. It was stunning throughout. Like I said, it's 80s, but it's still an older panel layout style. We have a couple great spread pages and splash pages, but we don't have a ton more experimentation. You know, we haven't reached that 90s comic era where everything gets really, really artistic and interesting with the panel layouts and stuff like that. So there's still, you know, a lot of hard borders, a lot of white edges, which makes it a great classic collection. It's probably what gives it great, like, little to no gutter loss, and have these awesome page numbers for the table of contents and mapping. But like I said, the art is still really clean, interesting. I feel like the action is conveyed very, very well. And like I said, the way that Shooter did this, I can absolutely commend Zeck as well on the art side. They're able to just shuffle through this huge ensemble of characters in a way that doesn't feel overcrowded or rushed, but everything plays out. Everyone has a moment to shine or two. At the end of the day, it's just extraordinarily well balanced, and I'm just really impressed at what they were able to execute and pull off here. After Secret Wars, we have an issue of Thor that goes into his kind of romantic entanglement with the Enchantress that we see throughout this book at one point. We also have a She-Hulk issue that's a more modern run that has to do with the origin of Titania, however you pronounce her name, and kind of her like hatred of the She-Hulk character. And then we have two what-if issues. One is if Peter was never able to separate from the symbiote, and it's basically a symbiote gone wild story that was a ton of fun. And the final what-if is a kind of what if everyone was still stuck on Battleworld 25 years after the Secret Wars event. What would have happened? Who would have like kind of gotten together, had children? And basically what that future would have looked like, what any future wars would have happened here on Battleworld, and it was just a fun issue. So those are the four issues. One of the what if issues and the She-Hulk issue are a lot more modern stylistically, so the art transition with these issues could be jarring. These are by no means required reading, but I thought they added a ton of fun, just extra detail to the world of Secret Wars. I'm so happy they threw them in here. Again, I would have loved to see Secret Wars 2 in here, had a much bigger omnibus, but this was still a really fun read. The collection pads itself out with a ton of extras, including the origins of everything with the toy line. We see pictures of everything, which was a great addition here. We have a ton of just unused artwork or different production level artwork, sketches, kind of blurbs about different levels of production. Yeah, a lot of great sketch work here, unused covers. Really a beautiful set here. I loved the wealth of extras we got in this omnibus. I think that really helped pad out this collection as well. And as a fan of extras in the omnibus format, this one had a just treasure trove of them. Very cool. Just a beautiful book here. Overall, this was, again, so much fun to read. I feel like I've been so repetitive with that, but this was just a lot more fun than I thought I would have with this book, and I was already excited to read it. But I think that there's a lot of modern readers out there who maybe enjoy older books that should definitely give this a shot. It's only mid-80s, so it's not even that old, and honestly, it's a great way to see a lot of my favorite characters. And with that, we've reached the end of the book, and all that's left is to give this collection a grade. For a merchandising opportunity that ended up being a really fun, epic crossover, the Comic Book Report is so happy to give Marvel's superhero Secret Wars a B+. What Shooter and Zeck were able to accomplish with this maxi series is really a triumph. It was such a fun collection of great Marvel characters battling and forming factions that I've never really got to see anywhere outside of an event like this. I think it really holds up. There were so many notable things that happened during this series, including the introduction of the symbiote Spider-Man costume. I think for a Marvel fan like me, this was a long overdue read. I would encourage anyone who loves the Marvel Universe, who maybe hasn't given this a shot, or maybe you're a fan of the Jonathan Hickman Secret Wars, this might be on your recommendation list from me. Definitely a fun read. I had a blast with this, would recommend to many readers out there. But let me know what you think of Marvel Superhero Secret Wars in the comments below, and generally what you thought of this video. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to leave a like, and have a good one.